Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you might be. I'm Pete Peterson, the very grateful Dean of Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy, and I am delighted to welcome you here to one of our Black History Month events. This webinar will feature Ian Rowe, who I'll introduce here in a second. Just a little bit of housekeeping. As is the case with most of our webinars, here at the School of Public Policy, I'll be engaging with our guest, Ian Rowe, for the better part of a half hour, 40 minutes or so. And then we'll allow 15 minutes for questions toward the end. Questions can be entered via the chat feature, and you should always feel free throughout our conversation here, either early or late, to enter into your questions, and I'll make sure that you get to those as well. This is being recorded, and so following this webinar, we'll be posting this to our increasingly popular YouTube channel for the School of Public Policy, and very much look forward to this being shared around to all of your networks. So let's get to it. Very delighted to welcome my friend Ian Rowe here to the School of Public Policy and back to the School of Public Policy. For those who may not know Ian, he is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on education reform, upward mobility, family formation, and adoption. Rowe is the co-founder of Vertex Partnership Academies, and we'll talk a little bit about that work, a new network of international baccalaureate high schools, which opened in the Bronx in 2022. He also serves with the organization Spence Chapin, a nonprofit adoption services organization. He currently serves as a senior visiting fellow at the Woodson Center, and several of you know that Bob Woodson is a dear friend of the School of Public Policies and someone who continues to be involved in our programs here. So just another point of connection there. Ian has an MBA from the Harvard Business School, where he was the first Black editor-in-chief of the Harvest, the Harvard Business School newspaper. He has a BS in computer science from engineering from Cornell and a diploma in electrical engineering from Brooklyn Technical High School, also known as Brooklyn Tech, one of New York's elite public high schools, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about that as well. And so without any further ado, Ian, welcome back to Pepperdine.
Yes, well, Pete, good to see you. Thank you for that. I'm exhausted listening to all of that. Hopefully I live up to all that was said before, but it's good to see you.
Great to see you too.
Yeah.
Well, the focus of this conversation will be on your very important book, Agency, which I'll hold up here. It was said by the great Frank Luntz that in the course of an interview, you need to mention a book 7 times for it to resonate with listeners and viewers. So
Wow.
we'll be talking about Agency, the 4-point plan, free for all children to overcome the victimhood narrative and discover their pathway to power. That, by the way, makes 2 references. So I have 5 more.
Oh my gosh.
5 more to go. Before we get into the subject matter of the book, I think it's important that in so many ways, in your own personal story leads directly to the subject matter of the book. The book itself references your life story in ways that really do show that you lead from a place of experience. That the points that you're making in the book are things that you've learned not only firsthand, but in the many social science research studies that you show. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you became connected to this, how a Harvard MBA is now and has been working in this field of promoting economic opportunity and education reform.
Yeah. Well, first of all, as always, thank you, Pete. Great to be here and great to be speaking on this topic. My personal story is one, hopefully it's not that remarkable. It's very much a story of the American dream. My parents, both from the Jamaica West Indies, took a detour to England. I was born in London, but ultimately came to the United States in the late 1960s, 1968. Kind of a tumultuous time in our country, particularly around race relations. There were
Mm,
riots and all sorts of things going on that one might think not a particularly good time for a Black family to move to this country. Um, but my parents saw something different. They saw a country that was changing. They saw the Civil Rights Act. They saw the Voting Rights Act. They saw opportunity. So, as I say often, they weren't running away from Jamaica. They were running to the United States.
mm,
And they basically felt that with a strong family, strong faith commitment, strong access to education, we could have a shot. We could have a shot at a great life. And the key was, were me and my brother going to be prepared when these opportunities came along? And that was really the basis for almost everything I've achieved in my life. My parents were married for 48 years before my dad passed away, and my mom passed away last year. And so part of the reason, and we'll talk about, I talk about
mm,
family so much and the importance of family structure, is that I've seen it, in my own life, of just what it meant to have two married parents, stable household for a long time, and
mm,
uh, and almost everything else that came from it. My ability to know that I always had a sort of a safety net in my own
mm.
family, and also high expectations. My parents, when I went to public school, we first moved to Brooklyn. That was when we first came to the United States, and it's kind of, I went to school, came home, did my homework, had dinner, went to bed, or continued homework. Then woke up, went to school. Came home,
Yep.
did my homework. Um, and so there was not a lot of wiggle room on what the expectations were for what was important. And again, we'll talk about it. We're obviously speaking on Black History Month, but many of the messages I send are that the things that allowed me to develop and become, hopefully the good person that I am, the
Mm,
things I'm trying to accomplish in my life have no monopoly on race,
mm,
and so we moved to Brooklyn, and then as I say, we moved on up to Queens, to a town called Laurelton, Queens, and this is kind of leading up to one of my first sort of seminal moments in my life, where we moved to Laurelton, Queens, which at the time was a predominantly white neighborhood, Italian, Irish, Jewish, but it was slowly changing
mhm,
racially as the town became more and more racially integrated. More Black families were moving in, and unfortunately, that led to a lot of racial tension and incidents. And my junior high school, 231, was kind of the epicenter of a lot of these incidents. And they were getting, a documentary was done on
mm,
Laurelton. So it was getting pretty bad. And the local school board decided to try and solve this problem of racial tension, particularly at our school, by creating an annex, another junior high school in another part of town, in fact, in Rosedale, Queens, which was a couple towns over, a few miles, but that part of Rosedale was, exclusively, almost exclusively white.
mm,
And so the idea was that, or what occurred, was that all of the white parents in our junior high school, 231, decided to take their kids out of our school and send them to the annex. And my parents, on the assumption that, where the white kids go, that's where the better education will go, we're going to send me to this school too. And there's, and I say this all the time, my parents would crawl through broken glass for my brother and I,
mm,
and if they thought that that was linked to better opportunity. And I never challenged my parents on anything. But something about this moment, when I was 12 years old, I liked my school. It was the Sunday night before we had to enter the transfer papers, and I begged my parents. I begged my parents not to transfer me. Like, please, I
mm,
like my school, I like my teachers. Why does it have to be better over there because of all the white kids? And why does it have to be worse if our school is going to be all black, which basically was what it was going to be.
Mm,
And I don't know what it was, but that moment when I pushed back against my parents,
mm,
I remember it because it was the Sunday night. My dad was on his recliner, my mom was in the couch. Like we were the same spots we always sat in
yeah.
whenever we had our family talks, and my parents relented. They let me stay. And I look
Mm,
back at it now because I wouldn't have called it then, but that was my first experience of this sense of agency, that I feel that I could play a role in my own future, that I had some skin in the game,
mm,
because I felt like my parents, they said, okay, we're believing in you. So it was like, oh my God, I'm
yeah.
on the
Yeah.
hook, and there's no question that that experience has shaped virtually every other experience I've had professionally and personally. Because things like, my belief, if I see an institution that's supposed to be great, it shouldn't matter what the racial or economic or whatever other demographics are in that institution. You should have the highest of expectations. And now I run public charter schools in the Bronx, and we have almost exclusively Black and Hispanic kids, and the mostly low income. It's not as if I'm waiting for some rich kids to show up to come to our school to suddenly have high expectations. And I mean, I could share many stories, but that's kind of a glimpse into
Mm,
how I came into this life. I did after junior high school. I then went to Brooklyn Tech. A high school, which is a specialized high school in the city. I studied electrical engineering, then went to Cornell, then worked for 6 years at what was then Arthur Andersen, became Andersen Consulting, and now is Accenture. But the point is, during those 6 years, I was mentoring and volunteering in public schools in New
mm,
York City, seeing lots of kids, who look just like me or look like, or whatever what they look like. They were kids that were, unfortunately, either they were born into the wrong zip code
mm,
or they were born into the wrong family structure. And those two
mm,
things, either one of those, made it so that they didn't have access to the same opportunities I did. And I certainly could have, been on the track to partner at Anderson, but that was honestly just very uninspiring. And then so
mm,
I decided to go to business school for 2 years to kind of figure out how could I take what I'd learned in the private sector, working for 6 years of my education, and put that back into public education?
mm.
I didn't quite know what that meant yet, so I had the chance to go to Harvard Business School. I met all these, captains of industry, which I was trying to convince them to go pursue a career in public education. None of them were having it. Um, but but I met a young woman, Wendy Kopp, who at the time
Yeah.
had founded Teach for America, and I was very inspired by her vision. And I did the crazy thing. I worked for Teach for America in between my first and second year at Harvard Business School, and then I did even the more crazy thing. I took a job for $25,000 a year and graduated from HBS and went to work for Teach for America. And
You
that's
totally threw off the average salary of graduating students of that year, I'm sure, from HBS.
Yeah, the thing that's funny, and I think, and, to your students at Pepperdine, I mean, the thing that when you go to a school like Pepperdine or you go to Harvard Business School, the whole idea is that you're getting a credential that
Mm,
means something, right? That means that you can go out and pursue your passion because you
mm.
can always go get a real job, right? So what I said to myself was, gosh, I'm really inspired. I'm going to go work for Teach for America. Who knows what that's going to be? I'll piece
Mm,
together the finances, and guess what? There were all these resources out there for people who wanted to go into jobs in public service or nonprofit. So we figured out a way, and I've never looked back. And
mm,
I really try to encourage college students, graduate students, to really think about the impact you really want to have.
mm,
And it may or may not be in that immediate role you're able to either financially or otherwise do what your aspiration is, but it works out over time. And
yeah.
what you gain in your sense of satisfaction, your impact, is it's incredible. So that's how, and that started me on a journey in lots of different roles in and around public education, to
Yeah.
now I've been running public charter schools for almost 15 years in the Bronx.
Well, that's very inspiring, Ian. And your story this is certainly not a memoir, this book, but there are important connections that you make throughout the book about your own life story and how that has led to the work that you do today. Again, the title of the book is Agency, the 4-point plan for all children to overcome the victimhood narrative and discover their pathway to power. And that is now 4 times of the 7 that I've mentioned. But I want to get to this word agency because I think the way that you frame it is, I think, very both compelling and provocative in the sense that it understands both one's own role, but also the environment in which you're coming into. And I just wanted to touch on this one sentence here. This is in page 19 in the chapter title, What is Agency? And you write, quote, agency is individually practiced yet socially empowered.
Yep.
And so this connection between the individual practice and responsibilities that we have as individuals, but the fact that it does require a certain ecosystem, if you will, which then obviously leads to much of the rest of the book. And where's the individual in this, but also it's not just simply pull yourself up by your bootstraps. There are environmental things, part public policy, certainly,
Yep.
that have to be at work here. Talk a little bit about how you understand the importance of agency.
Yeah. I mean, you're not alone, you know. I think that's the key message here, that if you're a young person and struggling, trying to figure out how you're going to make it, you're not alone. And that applies to rich kids, poor kids, black kids, white kids. You're not alone in the sense of there's going to be expectations of you as an individual, but you don't have to figure all of that out on your own. And you know, in running schools for the last 15 years, I've just seen a lot of young people trapped in what I call these 2 meta narratives that, in my view, impede their ability to have a sense of agency, or this idea that you could lead a self-determined life of meaning and purpose.
Mm.
And I call these 2 meta narratives blame the system and blame the victim, you know. And, you know, in America today, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, this blame the system narrative has really taken hold, where
Mm.
if you're not successful in this country, it's because America itself is rigged. You know, if you're based on your race, your class, your gender, you're either an oppressor or you're an oppressed class. You know, the systems are rigged against you, and no matter how you try, you know, whether it's capitalism itself is evil, the system, the structure. You know, there's institutional barriers, there's systemic barriers, there's structural barriers. And, you know, if you're a 7-year-old kid in the Bronx, you know, hearing this over and over and over and over again, you know, after a while, you're going to feel like, I guess that's true. I guess it's the system, and I am individually powerless to overcome these barriers. And I find that obviously a very debilitating message, and obviously robs young people of agency. But simultaneously, on the other side, you kind of hear this: if you're not successful in this country, it's not because America is racist or inherently oppressive. You know, it's not America that's the problem. You're the problem, right? You, as an individual, have not taken advantage of all these incredible opportunities that exist in our country. You didn't pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You didn't get it done. And now, again, for a young person, like, we have to have some grace. You know, I'm in a school district in which only, you know, the school we just opened is in a school district in which only 7% of kids that graduate from high school graduate ready for college, right? Meaning 93% of kids, there are about 2,000 kids in this district, in District 12 in New York City, in the Bronx. About 2,000 kids start. 4 years later, 93% have either dropped out, or they did earn their high school diploma, but still cannot do math nor reading without remediation. And in New York City, there's a cap on charter schools. So if you had an idea to create a more empowering alternative for those kids, you couldn't do it, right?
Mm.
So that 7-year-old kid can't solve that problem, right? So the idea of blaming the
Mm.
victims ignores that there are actual structural barriers that can be policy, addressed through policy. But between these two narratives of blame the system and blame the victim, basically, you know, either the system is rigged against you or it's your fault for not figuring it out. Where does that leave someone? Right?
Right.
Where does it leave someone? And so my empowering alternative is this idea of agency. Agency. And I define agency as the force of your free will guided by moral discernment. The force of your free will guided by moral discernment, right? So if all of us, because there are lots of people in the world that have free will, but they've done bad things, right? But the question is how do you exercise your free will? In which direction? How do you know right and wrong? That's where this key of moral discernment comes from. And this is why I say agency is individually practiced but socially empowered,
Mm.
because your ability to exercise your free will in the right way for your life doesn't come from nowhere.
Mm.
There are key institutions that have played a role. And in my now 30 years running schools, we're at the White House, MTV, I've been at some great institutions, Teach for America, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I've been at some great institutions that have tried to improve outcomes for young people. And I've just seen young people who have been able to break the cycle of disadvantage, because I've seen young people, rich kids, poor kids, black kids, white kids, Asian kids, Hispanic kids, kids in homeless shelters, kids who've suffered domestic abuse, all sorts of issues. As they entered young adulthood, unfortunately, they recreated the same dysfunction that they experienced as a child. And it's heartbreaking to
Mm.
see. And yet
Mm.
I've also seen kids from those same exact backgrounds make different sets of decisions where they were able to break the cycle of disadvantage. And the animating question of my life has been, what makes the difference? What makes the
Mm.
difference? Why is it that some kids are able to have a future orientation regardless of circumstance, right? To the point where they can say, you know what? I don't have to repeat this. I can change. I can change. And in my experience, they didn't just figure it out on their own. Regardless, and this is where my framework of FREE, family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship come from, where my observation was these were the four pillars that
Mm.
typically, in my experience, played a role in helping young people develop their own sense of agency, starting with family. Regardless of the family that someone may be from, regardless of the dysfunction in that family, they were on the pathway to form a different family. This
Mm.
is why we teach something in our high school called the success sequence, which we can talk about.
Yep.
But success is just data that says if you get your high school degree, full-time job, and if you have children, marriage first, 97% of millennials avoid poverty that follow
Mm.
that series of decisions. It's not 100%, but it's pretty compelling data. The
Yep.
second observation, people who were able to break the cycle of disadvantage usually had some type of personal faith commitment. Usually, they lived by a moral code,
Mm.
typically informed by some kind of organized religion.
Mm.
Christianity, Buddhism, it almost didn't matter, but that they lived by a set of tenets and that they were part of a group of people and they were regular rituals, weekly going to church or, going to the synagogue, whatever it might be, but they were part of a community of people that loved them, that expected them to live up to this moral code, and it also could be a fallback whenever these inevitable challenges of life come forward. Third observation, so family, religion. Third observation was education. Kids that were able to break the cycle of disadvantage, if they were trapped in a school system in which only 7% of kids graduated from high school ready for college, they typically were able to get some kind of choice. Their
Mm.
parents, hook or by crook, got them into the local Catholic school or a charter school or something that gave them a shot. So kids, they benefited from some kind of educational freedom or school choice. And if those three things were in place, family, religion, education, that usually led to the last E in FREE, which was
a sense of an entrepreneurship. You have an entrepreneurial mindset, which I define as someone who's a problem solver. It could
Mm,
mean starting your own job. I mean, it could mean starting a company, but more so it means that you can tap into these networks that you've built in as far as the first three pillars and be able to solve challenges within your own life. So that's a very shorthand. Obviously, there's a much longer book about this, but that's my pathway to say we have expectations of you as an individual. However, you don't have to do it alone. And there are these institutions, the family that you're on the pathway to form, personal faith commitment, access to high quality education, which again, other people have to solve that structurally, and then an entrepreneurial mindset. That's what I'm hoping to instill in all of the young people I now interact with to lead the life of your own choosing.
mm. Well, we're going to get into the different elements of F.R.E.E. in a second, but I wanted to touch base back on the socially empowered piece, because you do get into the types of environments where agency has a greater opportunity to be practiced. At one section of the book, in which you're talking about what is agency, you cite the research of Raj Chetty, who was at Stanford and is now at Harvard, the economist. And I just wanted to quote this passage here. In his landmark study of the intergenerational mobility of 40 million children and parents, Harvard economist Raj Chetty and colleagues described the United States as, quote, a collection of societies. Some are, quote, lands of opportunity with high rates of economic mobility across generations. Others are wastelands in which, quote, few children escape poverty. A major conclusion was that the makeup of a neighborhood had a huge effect on intergenerational mobility. So how were you're in a place, especially through Vertex and your work
Yeah.
in the Bronx, which would have to be described as a what they call here, where there aren't this
Yeah.
is not a land of
You, you,
opportunity, if you will.
yeah. Yes. Because of our technical difficulties, I can't show the map I was going to show, but in that study, I'll describe it. Raj Chetty and his team actually created a map of the United States. If you should really try to access this study, it's
Yeah.
called Land of Opportunity. And in this map, basically what the researchers did, they looked at 40 million tax records over 30 years. So they went back in time and found kids that were born in, I think, between maybe 1990s. I forget the exact timing, but the essential idea was they found kids all over the country, fully comprehensive tax records, and they really analyzed those kids that were born in the bottom quintile, okay, of economic progress, and
Mm,
then measured those same people 30 years later. And they then said, what was the likelihood in which communities around the country were kids most likely to end up in the top
mm.
quintile? And it's an amazing map because the first thing that
I
you'll
think we've
notice.
got it actually in the chat. Melissa has been gracious enough to share.
Oh,
Um, and maybe what I'll do is I'll just share my screen here to
oh,
see
perfect.
if I can pop it up here.
As you're doing that, I'll describe it because when you show the visual, I think it's really striking because the first thing you notice is the level of variability over who gets access to the American dream.
Right.
Because the map has the lighter the area, the more likely you are to go from the lowest economic quintile to the highest economic
Here it
quintile.
is. Here it is right here.
Oh, there it is. Fantastic. So the lighter the color, the more upward mobility. The darker the color, the lower the upward mobility. So a few things pop out right away. One is, while we have a federal government and national policy, it is quite clear the factors that drive upward mobility are much more driven by what's happening locally than what's happening at the national level.
Mm.
And to their credit, the researchers, Chetty's team, really dived in and said, what's causing this? You know, what
Mm.
is it? Or is there anything common about these particular communities? And, you know, Utah was the highest, Salt Lake City, highest level of
Right.
upward mobility relative to other places like I think Atlanta, which had some of the lowest levels.
Yeah.
And these were the things that they found. And it all kind of maps to this idea of free. What were the biggest factors that drove upward mobility? One, the significant percentages of single parents was an indicator of downward mobility. So where you had larger numbers of married two-parent households, basically you had much higher rates of upward mobility, even in homes where a kid may not have two parents, right? So it's
Mm.
very the neighborhood effect. So
Yeah.
this idea that you were interacting with coaches or teachers or pastors, significant impact, right? And in fact, based on Chetty's study, it had the highest level of impact. What was number two? Number two was the level of religious participation within those local communities and civic and engagement in civic organizations more broadly.
Mm.
But again, this idea that what bubbled up, what really explained most of the light areas in this country, one, the number of married two-parent households, the strength of those, and the lower number of single-parent households, the engagement with religious organizations, and what was third? Access to high quality education. So
Mm.
K to 12, did those kids have access to good schools? Again, charter schools, Catholic schools, where there's some kind of tuition supports. But not surprisingly, those three things are what help drive most of those areas in which upward mobility, going from the lowest quintile when you were born to the top quintile 30 years later. I find this Chetty's research here incredibly powerful and compelling, and forces us to confront questions such as, you know, is race the biggest determining factor of whether or not a kid will be successful or not? Is
Mm.
gender, even is economic class, because this research, you know, across all economic levels. And what it forces us to do, in my view, is step back and say, if we know that both based on common sense, right? You know, family, religion, education, that seems like it would make sense. But also
Mm.
social science says these are the levers that make the most sense. Then shouldn't that influence the kinds of levers that we're pulling to improve outcomes for people of all races?
Well, let's get into the F.R.E.E model. F.R.E.E is an acronym for family, as you said, family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship. I just want to go through these quickly because I want to make sure that we leave time. We're already getting questions in the chat. And again, I want to invite those from all of you who are tuning into this. You can enter your questions into the chat feature. And I wanted to touch on first the F, which is family, and go a little bit deeper into something that you mentioned before, Ian. And this is in page 102 of the book. Yet we can ignore the data no longer. Great schools must confront the importance of family stability. We cannot control the decisions made by the parents of our students, but it is within our control to influence the family structure of the next generation, because we decide what we teach children about family formation and the likely paths to fulfillment. And I wanted to jump ahead just one page because you mentioned here what your experience has been like putting this into practice at Vertex and in other places. In my own work in low-income communities, I started to see the disconnect between those who claim to advocate for people in challenging situations and those in the situations themselves. My conversations with single parents in the community revealed that far from being insulted, these parents welcomed the idea that schools would have the courage to speak to their children about better life course decisions.
Well, that's a
So
good writer.
talk again a bit about why this isn't just reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? I mean, this is about life, what you call here, better life course decisions.
Yep.
And the
Yep.
fact that the parents, even if they didn't practice it themselves, appear to welcome that in the teaching of their kids.
Very quick story. When I was designing Vertex Partnership Academies, I was visiting high schools across the country, one of which was in New Orleans. Went to a very top high school, visited, and this class visited a ninth grade class at this particular high school, almost all low-income kids, Black, Hispanic, and Asian students. And it was at the time where we had introduced teaching this concept called the success sequence in our middle school in New York, and I was getting lots of pushback. You can't teach this to kids. These parents, you're going to shame these kids because their parents didn't follow this series of decisions. You're just trying to impose middle class values. I'm like, yeah, I am trying to impose middle class values. But it was huge opposition. And
Yeah.
so here I am now in New Orleans saying to these students, hey, I got a challenge back in New York. I'd love to ask you a question. I said, this is literally what I said. If you knew that there were a series of decisions in your control, that when young people just like you follow that series of decisions, 97% of people who follow that series of decisions avoid poverty and the vast majority enter the middle class or beyond, would you want to know what those decisions are? And the students looked at me and they're like, well, yeah, why wouldn't I want to know? And I said, well, there's some grown-ups who think that I shouldn't tell you. And you know what? That maybe you might get insulted or you might get hurt in some way or offended. So you know what? Better just not to tell you at all. And this is from my time at MTV. If you ever want to get young people interested in something, you dangle it, and you pull it away. But so the students said to me, what are you talking about? You tell us, you let us decide if what you're about to tell us is important to us, but don't deprive us of this information. And that was a huge like a green light for me, because there's so many of these self-appointed people who are speaking on behalf of the oppressed and blah 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 that know nothing about the actual lives that these young people are facing. And so we proceeded to have a great conversation about the success sequence. I presented it in what's called a descriptive fashion, not prescriptive, meaning here's the data associated with this series of life decisions. That data says 97% avoidance of poverty. Here's another series of decisions that have much greater likelihood of poverty. But the point is, you decide. And at the end of that conversation, what I felt was that the students felt that they had been respected as future decision makers within their own lives. And that's what we're talking about. And I remember going back and we started doing focus groups with eighth grade parents. And their message to us, just like you just said, and just like it was written in the book, they said, thank God someone is teaching this to my kids, because I wish someone had taught me these things when I was making decisions in my own life, when they were making their own decisions, and it is true. Many of our parents had not followed the success sequence, but they were damned if they were going to be denied the opportunity for their kids to learn information that could be helpful to them. And I've just found that in general, there's a lot of hypocrisy when it comes to these kinds of issues. And I get it. It's sensitive. We don't want to blame the victim. We don't want to demonize single moms. I get it. I'm right there with you. But to ignore the data, you cannot be an honest broker running schools and not totally confess the crucial role that family structure plays. And that's not a demonization. That's just looking at a cold, hard reality. And so if we know it's so central, then why wouldn't we help young people think differently about the future decisions that they're going to make?
The R in free is religion. And as you point out in the book, this isn't just simply, and simply isn't the right word, this isn't only one's personal set of beliefs, but the importance of those, having some sense of a higher power. Most of certainly the Abrahamic faiths practice that there's a God who cares about you and is certainly interested, if not calling you to a certain life. But there's also the work of the church itself and the community piece to that
The
as
religious
well.
institution, yes.
Yeah, so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about both of those components.
No, it's important, and and it is true that religiosity is actually on the decline in our country. However, when you look at the data for young people who do have a personal faith commitment in their own lives, much lower levels of depression, alienation, anxiety, loneliness. It's like a flip. It's like a flip chart, and all of us are seeing the mental health issues that kids are experiencing, especially post-pandemic, and faith has a role to play. So that's from the individual's perspective. And there's a great book called I think it's called God, Grades, and Graduation. I think it's called that. That really goes into even more detail about how having a personal faith commitment can help you academically, socially, many other factors. But within that same chapter, I do talk about the importance of religious institutions becoming much more engaged and not sitting on the sidelines. We have so many issues in our society right now where, in my view, religious institutions have the moral authority and voice to speak on issues in a way that can cut through in ways that many conversations right now, there is no sort of there's no absolute truth. There's kind of a relativism, and that could mean more religious schools, more religious institutions running schools. So and there does seem to be across the country, there are more and more states, for example, that are allowing publicly funded vouchers to be used at private religious schools, which I support. If a parent wants to send their kid to a particular school, they should have the right to do so. Why would the government restrict the ability? And that's exactly what happened in Maine, I think, last year, where there was a voucher program, and parents could spend that money everywhere except a religious school, and that was down. And so the role of religion even in a society, and I get it, that seems that religion is not in favor, we cannot ignore its importance. And the last thing I'll say on this, when I first started writing the book, my framework around F.R.E.E. I had not yet developed. I was really focused on the success sequence and education, work, marriage, children, almost like a very technical set of interventions. But it was really as I got into the book, the success sequence almost ignores the moral dimension. What is it that's going to help a young person make these decisions, especially if you're in a community where you're not seeing this behavior? There's got to be something else that's helping you. And in my view, and my research show that religion often played that role to be almost like the self-correcting force that young people then start making these kinds of decisions.
Again, I want to invite questions here as we get into our last 15 minutes or so. We've talked quite a bit about the first E in F.R.E.E., which is education. So I wanted to jump in with the time we have to look at that last E, which is entrepreneurship. And as you say, this isn't simply about getting people to start their own businesses. It's actually about a perspective on one's life. And I wanted to get into at least one of the paragraphs in the book where you delve into this definition. And this is on page 207. Quote, entrepreneurship is the exact opposite of learned helplessness. It is the force that enables young people to become problem solvers when obstacles arise. By embracing the concept of entrepreneurship, you can better envision yourself as an owner, a steward, a curator of your own life, someone who has the ability to handle temporary setbacks, who can leverage the factors within your control to reshape outcomes, even when conditions may suggest otherwise. So talk again about why you included that second
Yeah.
E of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, what's interesting was that family, religion, education are more traditional pillars. People see those as institutions. And entrepreneurship, what one of these things doesn't belong. And the way I think about it is that if you are on the pathway to form a strong family, if you have a personal faith commitment, typically through some organized religion, if you've benefited from education through educational freedom or school choice, those three things together actually are the thing that form the last E. They are what make you part of networks, give you the confidence, give you the background, give you the sense that, you know what, I've got a strong family, or or I know what the families I want to form. I've got a strong sense of moral direction. I've got a good education. That's what actually makes you have what I call an overcomer's mindset,
Mm,
right? The idea that challenges are going to come, and that can be if you're poor, if you're black, if you're short, if you're whatever, right?
yeah.
Because life is hard for everybody, newsflash. Um, and
This just in.
so, what's that?
This just in.
This just in, exactly. And I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but the point
Yeah.
is, if you keep telling young people that based on your race, I mean, I just saw Joy Reid, this multi-million-dollar announcer on MSNBC, talking about, the fact that she feels she's owed reparations being a black person. And it's just, if you just, and there, we could have a long conversation about this, but if you are constantly getting this message over and over and over and over again that you're owed, or it's somebody else's problem, or it's a structural barrier or institutional challenge, you're not going to have an overcomer's mindset. You're
Mm,
not going to have a sense that you have the ability to determine what is the life ahead of me. And so, again, my empowering alternative is agency. This
yeah.
idea that you can lead a self determined life, you don't have to do it alone. These four pillars are within everyone's grasp, regardless of race. And so that last E is, in my view, it's crucial because
Mm,
it's the thing,
ties it together.
it's the internal force that you now have that allows you to really drive your life forward.
Let's get to a couple questions that are coming in. Again, we invite them here as we get into our last 10 minutes or so together. Eric Green asks, when it came to writing your book, how many conversations have you had in terms of encouraging students to walk away from their fear in terms of becoming their own person in society?
Wow.
Do you, are there stories lights, where you see lights go on with people?
I mean, lots. I mean, lots. I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of our kids, a lot of our students, from the time I ran, starting running elementary and middle schools, are from backgrounds where someone looking in would just write those kids off. They're from a single parent family, or their father is incarcerated, or they're born into poverty, or they've experienced domestic abuse, and so there are lots of conversations. And this may sound harsh, but in a sense, the message that we send to our kids is that it doesn't matter, in the sense that, yes, we have to acknowledge these are real challenges that you've experienced, that you will continue to experience, but you can never, ever put yourself in the position where it says your circumstance dominates your
Mm,
future potential.
mm,
So the new high school we've just launched, Vertex Partnership Academies, is organized around the four cardinal virtues of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. And we chose these cardinal virtues. The Latin root of word cardo means hinge. So all other character-based strengths,
mm,
determination, responsibility, perseverance, all come from these four. And we've crafted what we call I statements, statements that our students memorize for each one. So, for example, courage is I reject victimhood and boldly persevere even in times of uncertainty and struggle. So imagine our kids, because we have our assemblies and all our kids in their blazers, looking strong, saying, "I reject victimhood and boldly persevere, even in times of uncertainty and struggle." Or temperance, "I lead my life with self-discipline because I am responsible for my learning and my behavior."
Mm.
First, our students learn these words in their head, but ultimately they learn it in their heart. They internalize these to know that regardless of circumstance, the one thing they have in their control is how they respond.
Mm.
It's how they respond. And so, yeah, I have lots of conversations with students about what they have faced and yet what they still have the opportunity to achieve. And I just think we have to have more of a future orientation for our students, and then give them practical ways to live that out
Mm.
regardless of circumstance.
Ian, it strikes me as you talk about that. I think and you touch on this in the book. We talk about it occasionally here at the policy school, but um, it seems to me that one of the other important parts of that religious piece, especially when, again, if you look at the Abrahamic faith, is that there's a concept known as redemption, that there are things that can be redeemed. And ipso facto, if something is to be redeemed, it has to be broken first and then
Wow.
fixed. And it seems to me that not only is your work about redeeming lives, but helping students to redeem their own lives. That ability to say it's not just a family where you're from; it's the family that you're going to form. That difference from being from and what you are going to do to form. That's essentially a redemptive exercise.
I often make the parallel to our students about the country in which they live in. In the United States has like with most countries, has a somewhat tortured history around certain issues, and yet there's this. De Tocqueville said it. The thing that makes America exceptional is its ability to repair her faults.
Mm.
He wrote that,
Mm.
more than 200 years ago, and it's a beautiful phrase, because what we say to our students is that you have those same tools of self betterment, of self renewal within you.
Mm.
Right?
Mm.
We are all broken in a way. Regardless of circumstance, we're all broken, but we
Yeah.
all have inner ability to heal, to see a different future for ourselves. And to me, that's the fundamental thing. When kids are hearing rhetoric that's constantly pushing all the things that you cannot do, you have defeated we won't even get to all the other things, but what you've defeated is that inner desire, that inner confidence
Mm.
that can be successful. And for us, it's central. It's central to having young people in particular, from any background,
Mm-hmm.
just have the ability to see a different future for themselves.
Another question, this one from Nate Peterson, is what are the results that you are seeing from your charter schools regarding the students following this model after they graduate? Are you seeing lasting impact, or are they being strongly influenced by other factors as they enter life after a more controlled environment?
Yeah, no, good question. So I ran a network of elementary and middle schools for 10 years. And so that was through eighth grade. And we started graduating our eighth graders, I think in either 2013 or 2014. And I'm proud to say that those graduates, those cohorts now went to high school. And now we even have some of those cohorts now graduating from college. So
Mm.
I'm very proud to say, like, significantly high percentages of them are from an academic perspective, they're working, they're graduating. As far as I can tell, almost
Yeah.
zero non-marital births, which is, I think
Wow.
something important. And now we just started a high school in 2022, so we're grades 9 and 10. So in a couple of years, we'll have more data on our students who are graduating from our high school and going to college. And just real quick note, The other thing we've realized to help put kids on a path to their own success is that we have to have multiple pathways in high school. So at the end of sophomore year, our students can choose either what's called the International Baccalaureate Diploma pathway, which is a pre-college, pre-university, very rigorous pathway, or the International Baccalaureate Careers pathway, which is
Mm,
also rigorous, but you have the opportunity, and you have the opportunity to do an apprenticeship in high school. So, for example, one of our career pathways is biomedical science, and we're partnered with Northwell Hospital, which is going to give you the opportunity to actually do an apprenticeship, maybe
mm,
one week, one time per week over a 2-year period, where you could, at the end of it, get a credential in
mm,
potential phlebotomy, taking blood, or physician's assistant. We have computer science. Anyway, the point is that how we measure success will likely be broadened to not only see, well, how many kids went to college, it could also be how many went into employment immediately out of high school with a
mm.
credential that they earned that has labor market value. So that's another thing. I don't really write about it a lot in the book because it's really emerged since. When we want to help more young people get on the pathway of leading a self-determined life, we have to recognize that college immediately out of high school should no longer be the only pathway, and that we need to create different strategies of equal stature. So anyway,
Mm.
it's one of the things we're doing to change how we measure our ultimate success.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, as we bring this to a close, Ian, and this has just been such an inspiring time together, and your book, Agency, the 4-point plan for all children to overcome the victimhood narrative and discover their pathway to power, is inspirational for anybody to read. I mean, much less the work that you're doing. So maybe as a way of, as I look at the names and faces of those who are joining us here, I see a number of students, some who are exploring or considering careers in education reform and education policy. I see one of our distinguished alums, Lance Christensen, on the screen, who's been very involved in education reform. He's actually running for the superintendent of education for the state of California. So he's
Oh, wow.
really
Okay.
put
That's
himself
great.
out there. Um,
Let me know how I
you
can
are-
help.
well, you've had a life where, starting with a Harvard MBA, but this passion where you've really taken that and moved in this direction. How would you encourage our graduate students, as they're thinking about possible career paths in public policy? Why should they think about education reform, and how maybe should they be thinking
Yeah.
about entrance points?
It's a really good question, because I had a very circuitous path, right? From business
Yeah.
school, then Teach for America, then I ran my own internet company, then the White House, then MTV, then the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and then and then I decided
Yes.
to run schools. And for me, I actually just got to the point where I became so frustrated that all these different levers. I mean, at the Gates Foundation, in 1 year, we gave away $470 million as a pilot, you know, to
Yeah.
help increase high school completion rates, and then college entry rates, and then optimally college completion rates. But in my view, it wasn't really moving the needle. And so I felt, for me, I had to run schools. I had to actually put myself in an environment where I really understood, like, in the heart of the Bronx, what does it mean to run a school of choice? What does it mean to run schools where the non-marital birth rate in the community is 84.5%, and
Mm.
only 7% of kids are graduating from high school ready for college? Like, how does that happen? How does
Yeah.
that happen?
Yeah.
Because it's been going on for generations. And what is it that we discovered? Like, in launching this high school, we got sued by the teachers union. They wanted to shut us down before we even opened.
Mm.
Thankfully, we won, but you just get so much more visibility into the actual challenges. So what I would recommend for anyone who is really considering policy, I'd really recommend, if you can do it, try to run whatever it is, the thing that you're trying to improve. Try to run that thing. in a local community for some period of time, just so you have truly granular experience of what the challenges are. I mean, I
Mm,
do a lot of work at think tanks and research, and it's amazing. But I have to tell you, sometimes I see a wide disconnect
mm,
between people in academia or think tanks and the very people that they're trying to help.
mm.
And the more that you can get real experience, whether you succeed or fail, will be incredibly helpful if you do choose to go down the policy or research route. But we just need more real world experience. I could not do what I do. I mean, I would jettison everything else and still focus on running schools. Seriously, it's there's nothing like it. There's nothing like succeeding, failing, but getting an understanding of what kids really need. So that's what I'd recommend.
Great advice. Ian, thank you again so much for your time and example and for this book, Agency, which again, I think that's 7. I'm not sure. I think it's close. But again, just as has been noted here in the chat with so many, Mary Barkey is here, who's on the Orange County School Board. So we're reaching those who are, and I know you serve
And
on
by
a,
the way, I ran for school board in my own town, and I've
that's
survived.
that's
Uh,
it, to tell the
I'm
story. So
yeah, and I'm going to run again this year. So that's another great thing to do. If you want to see local issues, run for your local school board.
great advice. Great advice. Well, again, Ian, thanks so much for all that have registered for this. We'll be turning around the um, video from this time, and we ask that you share it out. It's definitely a way to continue to promote the messages and work of Ian and the broader field and mission of education reform, which we certainly support here at the
Yep.
School of Public Policy. So again, Ian, thanks so much.
Now, Pete, thank you, and thank you for everyone. Let's continue to do this. I mean, there is a whole generation of young people relying upon us to be exceptional. So let's be exceptional. Thank you.
Thanks all.